CritMedic podcast, and this week we're going to talk about how I got screwed helping second world EMS systems. So, while I spin you this mournful tale of my woes that I had trying to help out in a developing nation, you have to keep in mind that my parents had moved down to Belize, which is why I got involved in the first place. So how did I get there? How do I get from being on top of the world in December of 2015? We reached our peak, we got our ambulance, looks like everything was going to go great, to mid-2016 where it all came crashing down. Well, I'll tell you the full tale. Just stay tuned and we'll get right. So my parents ended up moving down to Belize in Central America because I was having kids at the time, and moving down to Florida didn't seem quite far enough away from everything. So Belize actually had some really nice adventures and really scenic areas as well. But a lot of people here don't really know where exactly Belize and San Pedro is, so let me give you a quick overview. So it's located down here in Central America, just south of Mexico, right next to Guatemala. It's a former British colony, so the official language of the country is actually English for all government business. And San Pedro is the only town on the I don't know if we'd call it, it's a key actually, of ambergris. So they actually spend half of the year down there, and being a paramedic myself, what's the first thing that you always think about whenever your parents go somewhere? Gee, I hope they have quality healthcare where they're going. So Belize is actually fairly scenic, and this is the view that they end up getting from their condo. I mean, who wouldn't move down for something like that? It's a very scenic area, very very prevalent to have tourists, in and around that very general vicinity. And it's one of those areas where golf carts are the primary method of transportation. There's a couple of cars on the island, but they're not as plentiful as golf carts. Everyone has golf carts to get around. Some of the people who live outside of town have more of like a Polaris because the roads are less developed. And some of the areas are really scenic. Bottom left corner, that's Estelle's on the beach. It's a great place to go for breakfast early in the morning as the sun is coming up. So Belize also has, or San Pedro has, these areas. This is a truck stop. They're using like these shipping containers. And what they're actually doing is they're using the shipping containers as a restaurant in itself, where they're cooking all the food. This is just north of the city of San Pedro. I shouldn't call it a city, more like a town of San Pedro. And this is actually a very popular tourist draw over there. And it's got a number of different shops. It's got a real college youth flair to it, and it's very popular with the younger crowd. This was the ambulance service when I first got involved with San Pedro. These had just been donated from Dubai to the Ministry of Health in Belize. And for those of you that don't know what these are, this is a tuk-tuk. A tuk-tuk is a three-wheeled motorcycle. It's popular sort of in the Southeast Asia region and some of the Middle East. And as a platform to work on, these are not overly stable. But, this is the best that they had, and this is what was donated to them. And a team of doctors actually got together and, started to make a makeshift ambulance service for the town of San Pedro. These are a number of the physicians that were involved. Third from the right there, that's Alex Parmalee. He would become the director of our ambulance service. So here's another shot. So the downside of these tuk-tuks, besides their lack of stability, is they really couldn't take a supine or semi-followed patient. You had to be sort of sitting up to be in the back of the ambulance. So they had a number of downsides, and ultimately the Ministry of Health said, you know what, these are really not suitable for patient use anymore. So they put the kibosh on those. So we had to start looking for an alternative option. So we went down this road, Alex Primley brought his pickup truck down to the island and created a makeshift, I guess, cab in the back. Now this is all sort of a homebrew setup, but it's better than what was currently there, which was, well, nothing. So this pickup truck in the back had this plywood cab, and it's really janky, to put it bluntly, but it actually functioned fairly well. You had a bench, you had a homemade cot made out of pipe fittings. So you want to talk about homebrew? This is about as homebrew as you can get. So ultimately, this didn't really see any use and never gained traction and approval, but it was something that was being developed. So what we tried to do, we contacted a lot of people and we got these donations. So I spoke with Iron Duck. Iron Duck's one of the major manufacturers of EMS equipment bags here in the United States. I called them up and I said, listen, this is what we've got. This is what I'm trying to do. Do you have anything that you can send, any reject samples or prototypes? And it just so happened they had a number of these prototypes that they had developed that they weren't using and selling. So they donated a number of these prototypes for EMS bags for us, which was fantastic. And we managed to pick up all these backboards. Now this was back when backboards were still cool. And so we managed to snag a number of backboards. And we also picked up the cream of the crop at the time was these 5 Zoll E-Series cardiac monitors, which is a major coup for us to pull off because a number of EMS services were still using these as their frontline monitor. So we managed to pick up 5 of these cardiac monitors, which was fantastic. And we picked them up, actually, most of them were donated. So the idea was that what do we do with these 5 cardiac monitors, or an EMS service that was just starting out? Well, the plan was we would have 2 ambulances. We'd have one in the north, one in the south, and we'd give one of these monitors, because they didn't really have any equipment to do 12 leads with at the government clinic. The plan was to give one of these to the polyclinic for their cardiac monitor, defibrillator, 12 lead setup. One of them to the air ambulance service, Wings of Hope, which was run by Bert, to provide some continuity of care, and one of them would be a reserve. So everything was set up and looking like it was going well. I managed to get a whole donations of supplies of 4x4s and rolled gauze and expired defib pads. I had some oxygen cylinders in there as well, which is probably not the approved way of shipping it in a cardboard box like that. But I had some oxygen cylinders. I had lots of equipment and expired medications from all sorts of different services everywhere that were contributing these. So I put them all into a wood crate and shipped them over to our director in Colorado. And the piece de resistance was this. It was an ambulance donated by Upper Mountain Fire Company up here in Buffalo. This is an older model ambulance, but it's actually a functional, very serviceable ambulance, and it came included with a stretcher. It was a manual stretcher, but there's nothing wrong with manual stretchers, especially compared to a pipe fitting stretcher. It's hands down a lot better. So everything was looking like it was going to be all set. We got the news that we were getting them delivered, and then nothing happened. So what exactly did happen? Well, we had government clearance to take these ambulances down to the port down in Florida, and we had arrangements with a shipping company that would send them over on a barge. So these arrangements were already made. The payments were already lined up to get them shipped. We even had one of the rare government exemptions to allow this to be shipped into the country duty-free, since we were registered as a non-governmental, non-profit organization down there. So everything was looking like it was set up. Alex took delivery of the ambulance, but he ended up not delivering to the port and actually sort of ran off with the ambulance and all the equipment. To be fair, he says that there was some issues with the board, and there was some sort of hijack where they were going to use the ambulance to promote their real estate business or something along those lines, which personally I wouldn't care whose name or what's on the side of the ambulance as long as there's an ambulance there. it could be like a NASCAR ambulance with all different stickers and sponsorships. I'd be fine with that as long as it has qualified personnel and equipment on board to be able to treat people. But for whatever reason, he absconded with all of our equipment and both of the ambulances that were set up to be donated, and everything. So this was, as you can imagine, a devastating loss. We had all tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment that was donated that was ready to go, and now we were back at square one. So where did that put me? Well, why don't I start off with saying what don't I have anymore at this point? Well, I don't have a director anymore since he ran off with the ambulances and equipment. I don't have any qualified staff. Everyone would have to be trained from scratch, and there's really not a developed training program in Belize for something along those lines. When I actually spoke with the Ministry of Health to talk about coming down there and being able to help out and work as a paramedic, they said, "Oh yeah, sure, send us, your credentials and a syllabus from when you took your paramedic, and we'll see if it matches, with ours." I said, "All right, great. Just why don't you send me over yours as well, and I'll see, I'll take a look and see if it, what I'm missing or what else I need to do." So, "Oh, well, we don't have one." So I'm not sure what they were going to match it up against, but they were going to match it up against some I guess contrived standard. But they don't really have a program really outlined for things at the time when I was looking into it. So I would have to train staff from scratch, and I'd be happy with really anything at that point. An ambulance with someone with advanced first aid would be better than nothing. And there really wasn't a lot of public interest and support. There was definitely the articles that came out where some gentleman was shot on the island, and it was in the wee hours of the morning. He was taken over to the government-run polyclinic by the police officers, and they said, "Well, the clinic opens in, let's see, it's 4 o'clock, it's probably another 3 or 4 hours. Well, good luck. Hopefully everything works out for you." And unfortunately, he died in front of the polyclinic waiting for it to open. There was recently, after the ambulance was supposed to have arrived already, there was another instance where a younger lady in her 20s was having a very severe asthma attack. The government-run polyclinic needed to send her to the mainland for treatment. So the arrangements at the time were she needed to be flown off of the island. There really wasn't any other way. You could either get flown out of the island, or you can get taken by water taxi, which is about an hour boat ride back to the mainland. So you're sort of detached from the bulk of civilization, so the only way to get there is either by air or by boat. However, unfortunately, they didn't have any way to get her to the airport. You could always use a golf cart to get her there, but they didn't have the portable oxygen equipment to get her, continuous care. And unfortunately, she died at the airport waiting for a medevac flight out because her condition was that severe, and they didn't have any means of continuing her care. The airport isn't really far from where the government polyclinic is, so it's really unfortunate, a real tragedy that this had to occur, and would have been totally avoidable if our ambulance had just managed to have been delivered. So while all these things do hit the media and there's public outrage, it dies off relatively quickly, and people go about their regular day-to-day lives. There's support, but it hasn't gotten to the point where there's definitive government funding and government sponsorship going for it. So that's another thing that we're lacking, and of course, without that, we're also lacking any sort of money. So without money, we also have a shortage of equipment. I was surprised that I managed to procure all that equipment on virtually a budget of nothing, but we managed to get what we did, and I don't think we'd be able to do it again since we'd have to start over. But I mean, it's not a total loss. We still do have some things going for us. So what do I have at present? Well, I still have the non-governmental organization. The main sponsor had, kind of backed away now since this all just fell apart. But what do I still have? Well, I have this. I have a logo. And now, I think it's actually a fairly good logo. I mean, I took time to work on that. Look at that. That's an awesome logo. And, that's about all I have going for it at the moment. So, where do I go from here? Well, I spoke with the folks over at BERT, which is the Belize Emergency Response Team, and I got to meet their director. I took a tour of their station. I got to hang out with their EMS squads as well. And, they seem to have a real good program going in Belize City. A couple years back, they were struggling a little bit, but now it seems under the new directorship that had taken over, things were on the up and up. Things were getting better. Quality of equipment was improving. This is one of their newer airplanes over here that I managed to see in their hangar. I'm doing the tourist thing over here in a t-shirt and shorts, so I was just taking a look around. And it appears that they've also managed at BERT to get a real bona fide, air medical ambulance. So they've gotten this helicopter, and it's a legit helicopter. It's not some hodgepodge makeshift, aircraft. This is the real deal. So it looks like they've done fairly well for themselves over at BERT, and managed to get this sponsored and done. So this definitely improves quality of care at the island. And it looks like not all is lost, because there is now another ambulance effort that seems to be coming to fruition. Under Dr. Dan is actually trying to make a clinic that's available to the general public. And part of his efforts are he's looking to do this ambulance service. So it's looking to start up. It hasn't started just yet. This is something that's been talked about for quite some time on the island. I remember I was talking to someone, they were talking about they were planning on getting this ambulance started maybe at some point. But it had been at least four years or so that they were talking about it, and nothing had really progressed up until this point. Now things are starting to move along. So I'm really glad to see that there's an ambulance service that it's looking like it's really going to start up. And best of all is that they're using these Polaris vehicles with an ambulance package built in. The reason is that there's areas outside of the town, especially down in the south, that are a lot harder to traverse, especially during rainy seasons, by traditional vehicles. You really need to have like an all-wheel drive to get down there. So some traditional ambulances might not work out that well. And in fact, BERT is having a similar issue as well. Some of their ambulances are the Ford van ambulances, and the downside of this is the mechanics of the Ford van ambulance is that everything is built down into the chassis, right underneath the cab. And it's a lot harder to access and maintain it. So they end up having to send it to the dealership, and even the dealership has a difficult time working on these vans. They don't see a lot of them. They see a lot of pickup trucks, so maybe a pickup truck front end would be better, and especially since it's more accessible to work on the engine. In a van, everything's pretty much underneath. So unfortunately, when you're talking about donating ambulances to a developing country, one of the issues that you encounter is there's a difficulty finding a support infrastructure to maintain these vehicles. There's a lack of expertise to be able to maintain these vehicles. And it's not BERT's fault. Even the dealership has a difficult time maintaining these vehicles because it's not something that they see very commonly. Their best vehicle, I believe, is one of their Land Rover ambulances. It's one of their longest-lasting vehicles in their fleet, but it's the easiest to maintain. And one of the things that BERT was looking for is they're looking for people who can volunteer to teach like an EVOC or CEVO course, as well as like a mechanical master class, if you will. Because part of the responsibilities of the vehicle operator would be not just to get from point A to point B, but to be able to handle mechanical issues that crop up along the way. When you're driving, well outside of Belize City for a couple of hours to get to another town in order to pick someone from a clinic over there, if your ambulance breaks down in the middle of a rainforest, it's a bit more inconvenient and it's slightly more life-threatening than if you break down, on the side of the road in suburbia. So it's not something you can just wait for a tow for. You have to be able to fix this stuff yourself. Minor mechanical things, fixing hoses, fixing fuses, changing a tire. So this is all sorts of things that they would need to have a formal workshop on, to be able to really be able to maintain the vehicles should something arise down the road. So I was glad to see that they got these Polaris ambulances because I think they can really traverse the terrain a lot better. And there's a couple lessons that can be learned from my experiences here. This is definitely a learning experience for me. And ideally, it's not one that I want anyone to repeat, but I don't want people to be discouraged from getting involved and trying to help out in developing EMS systems worldwide. So what are some of the lessons here that we could learn? Well, one of the lessons is be careful who you trust. And ironically, this was a quote directly from the director who ended up running off with the ambulances and equipment. So the irony of that statement is definitely not lost on me, but it was definitely an eye-opener. I mean, here was this gentleman who was working with the government doctors at the government polyclinic. Everything seemed to have official approvals, official sanctions. Everything looked on the up and up. We've gotten government approvals for, duty-free import, NGO, the whole 9 yards. Everything was looking like it was going to happen in a legitimate manner. But unfortunately, these things do happen. So sometimes you have to be really careful who you trust and who you get involved with. And the other thing that you can learn as a lesson here is try to partner and work with large international organizations. Some of the Rotary and Lions International, they can definitely assist with getting donations set up. They have chapters all across the world, all across the globe, so they would be able to help out with some of the logistical back end of things. Brothers Without Borders is another effort that tries to shape the fire and EMS systems of, I believe it's the Dominican Republic. And they've gotten the support of the U.S. military to transport some of the fire trucks over to the Dominican to really help things get going. So finding a partner, in countries that are donating things would be, a fantastic benefit to anyone who's looking to get something started up. The downside with our approach was we didn't have a formal infrastructure here set up to accept donations. Everything was set up in Belize. So when it came time to donate the ambulance, well, we needed to have someone to come sign for the ambulance and take it down to Belize. And unfortunately, it was signed personally by our director, who ended up absconding with the ambulance. And if it was run through a international organization, everything would go through them for their donations, and it would be a lot easier to prove a paper trail and to aid in the prosecution if something like that does occur and has a less likelihood of occurring. So take it from me, be careful who you get involved with and how you get involved. Try to get involved with large organizations, but it's definitely worthwhile and a fulfilling experience to try and bring some EMS service to a population that really needs it. So until that next time, remember, always look for the opportunity to help another EMS system out, whether it's domestic or abroad internationally. There's needs for ambulances and equipment, all throughout the globe. In Belize, the government polyclinic has medications that are expired, 5 years out of date. I walked into their code card and took a look. The atropine was labeled atropina since it came from Mexico, and it was 5 years expired. A lot of these medications still have a long shelf life after their expiration, but the point is that a lot of these countries need some assistance with their medical services. So if you're in a position to help, I would highly encourage you to get involved, and hopefully we can help a lot of populations that really need it. So until next time, you can catch me here, same time, same place, 11 p.m. on Sundays. Take care.